Hello. Welcome to another live stream. Today is a special live stream. We are going to talk urban fantasy and then we're going to launch the Kickstarter. So I'll give a second or two to get online. I hope the stream quality is okay. I would love it if somebody could confirm for me in the chat that you can hear me and you can see me and all of those good things. Yeah, so I've actually just come from FinCon because I bollocksed my scheduling. So I am fresh from a convention, which was amazing. It was a lot of fun, but it did take all day. So at FinCon, which it's a small con, right? So I mean, Finland's a kind of a small country, and it's a small community, but it's a lot of fun. And I browsed the secondhand bookstore and re-bought a whole bunch of books that I used to own before I moved to Finland. I got lucky. So I got like a Game of Thrones box set and a Mistborn box set and things like that people were apparently putting up for secondhand sale, which was great. So benefit to me. Hello, Lee. I hope that you are having a good time, and I hope you can hear me and see me and all of those good things. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is, hey, Gary, good to see you. What I want to talk about today is urban fantasy, right? And how you world build for it and kind of the complexities around it. Because on the one hand, right, urban fantasy is great to build because it has a very low barrier to entry, right? So even like a non-fantasy reader, even like say somebody who just likes a bit of paranormal spice can read an urban fantasy and get into it because of the low barrier to entry, right? Because you don't have to, you don't have dragons and weird creatures and so on, except where it's part of the magic. And the real world acts as an anchor. But if you're going to build an urban fantasy well, there are, I feel, areas you need to pay attention to, right? Because you need to make sure that your history of our world makes sense. Okay, so what I did with, I'm just gonna share my very pretty cover, because I think it's a very pretty cover. So I hope that you guys can still see and hear me and everything's okay. So that's the cover of my urban fantasy, and I really and what I did with my history was I said, okay, I'm just going to stop the share because I have affecting the stream quality. So I said, okay, what I want to do is I want to make sure that my world makes coherent sense from where we are at the moment. So magic is not open. Okay, this is a closed magic world. It's a magic is secret. Yeah, that might change during the course of the series, but that's a different discussion. So I then went, okay, but magic wasn't always secret. So when did it change, and when did magic start, and all the rest of that? So I built out my history of, let's say magic has always been with us in our world, but we called it, gods. So we called various fairy entities gods, and they distributed certain blessings, but they're fickle creatures, and they are sometimes they'll bless and sometimes they'll curse, and it's very unpredictable. You basically have to seal them into contracts to get anything real out of them. And obviously they are very good at negotiating and avoiding those kinds of contracts. Okay, so this led into humans actually developing empires, or clumping together and developing empires to resist the fairy, right? So, and that then was kind of my, like, so China, in the East, China developed, and in South America, you had the Mayans and the Aztecs, and all those empires developed there. And so different empires developed that protected humans, and some humans lived with the fairy, right? So the Celts, for example, in Europe lived with the fairy, and they basically lived in harmony with them, and the Druids kind of kept peace between them. And in North America, the First Nations there lived with the fairy of their realm and their continent. And then over time, it became evident to the monarch of the Earth Court that fairy was stagnating because humans were stagnating, right? And this was basically because fairy was smothering human advancement. So through various shenanigans and manipulations, etc., she created the pact, which was sealed between representatives of the major human empires and continents and the fairy courts, the 4 fairy courts. So there's 4 elemental fairy courts: earth, air, fire, water. And they sealed this pact that basically keeps the fairy realm in fairy, in the Aether realm, unless they can pass as human. And it enforces secrecy over the fairy activities and over magic and so on. And so humans came up with ways to keep things secret and so on. And I established that because I wanted secrecy in the world. Now, I'll be honest with you, in any given urban fantasy, the whole secrecy thing is kind of flimsy. Like if you poke it too hard, it will fall apart. And you kind of make peace with that as a fantasy world builder and as an urban world builder. But that was how I approached it, and how I created that kind of history of the pact. So that's the first thing you have to do. The second thing you have to do is you have to think about the actual city you're building in, right? So, and I feel like this is something that is so important with urban fantasy, is the city itself should play a part in the plot. The plot shouldn't work if you just pick it up and move it to another city. There should be something about this city that is key to your urban fantasy. Otherwise, why are you writing an urban fantasy? You know, just write a modern fantasy or a paranormal or whatever. Like if you're gonna do urban fantasy, like build that city, make the city important. And so I picked Las Vegas because it's a city I know fairly well, and I have friends living there and so on. And also because it has the Valley of Fire, and it has all of this kind of elemental heat going on, right? And that really worked well for my plot, that desert environment. And then Las Vegas gave me access to all of the desert environment, which I then proceeded to use into my plot and to draw in. And Las Vegas is an amazing character for an urban fantasy environment, because there's the Strip, which is where all the tourists are and where a lot of people work in Vegas. And then there's the rest of Vegas, which is not like the Strip, right? And that dictomony between the Strip and the rest of Vegas creates an almost a tension within the city that you can exploit for certain things, and that you can work with, and that you can change. Now, what actually inspired me to write the book was the magic system. Okay, so um, you guys know I love me a good magic system, and I'm not too fussed about it being hard or soft. I just wanted to make sense and to enrich the plot. And the magic system I had in my head was, very importantly, it comes from fairy dust. So fairy dust is created when tiny little bloomfay do the devil's tango, and they're like Tinkerbell fairies, basically. And this dust then fuels magic. But I wanted it to mesh with our as as the world, like all of the different esoteric disciplines we've had. And so everybody manipulates magic a little differently, right? So the Celts have druids, and our main character Lily, she is a druid. So she uses Ogham script, and she carves out spells on these Ogham staves. But um, her girlfriend is a sumi artist, so she paints her spells using ink painting, traditional Japanese ink painting. There are some Roman heritage characters that write their spells in Latin. There and there is some First Nation disciplines, but I am not crazy about it when, like, there's this thing of, like, the magic completely survived of colonized people, because then why, then the colonization stops making sense. Um, and I feel like that is not fair to those people who suffered colonization. So, like, their magic took a dent and is no longer practiced as full disciplines. It's practiced as add-ons to make things more powerful and so on. But a lot of that knowledge has been lost in the process of colonization. So there's like all of these various different disciplines, and some of them have survived and some of them haven't. And they all and that gave me so much to play with in terms of making the magic system real. And then there's fairy magic itself, which is basically elemental manipulation, right? But only fairies or sorcerers, people who've made a deal with greater fairy, can use that kind of magic. Everybody else is basically like use the fairy dust and produce the spells. And that also gave me a magical economy, because you have to somehow get this fairy dust, right? So the main character keeps a garden where a whole lot of bloomfay stay in her garden, like she maintains a garden for it. Or you can trade for it, or you can seal a contract. So whatever you do, you have to somehow keep some of these little bloomfay fairies happy enough to give you this fairy dust to use in your magic system. So, that was more or less that was the inspiration. That was the starting point of the story, and then I kind of built it out from there. Um, what do you guys think about building urban fantasy worlds? How do you approach it? Do you start from, like, the real world position and kind of the real world city, or do you start from the fantasy part and how you want to add fantasy into the world? So as I said, I started with the magic system. So I started on the fantasy side and threaded that through into the world. Um, and then from there, I uh, I take the world through. But if you have a really strong idea for a specific city, I can see you going the other way and starting with, like, our world and our kind of environment and city and so on, and then building backwards and deciding what kind of magic and fantasy best supports that city and that plot. So I don't know if there's other urban fantasy world builders in chat. Um, There are indeed competitions with perfect fairy havens and enticing fairies and so on. And then there are of course people who are assholes, and instead of keeping the fairies happy, they trick them into contracts by hook or by crook, and kind of use these contracts to force them. So there's kind of these two ways, and it's how people approach it. To me, that was realistic. Like, some people will be cool and will, like, attract fairies, and some people will be real a-holes and will act like real a-holes. So, um, Yeah, the modern D&D characters in the modern world is a lot of fun. Um, yeah, that is a good approach, Latino, where you build the historical context first, determining the events you want to happen, and then bring in the characters and magic. I can absolutely see that working as well. Like, I think it also depends sort of on where your inspiration strikes, right? So my inspiration was very much on this concept of the magic system, of like this magic driven with this economy of fairy dust. And how you could use it to build out a magic system based on these purchases. Um, so that is the essence of the world. And the other thing with urban fantasy that you really have to think about carefully is whether you want to go open or so examples of open worlds for urban fantasy is True Blood, the vampire stories, the Anita Blake stories, the Meredith Gentry stories. Those are all open worlds, right? Everybody knows that there's magic. Everybody knows that there's vampire, and the world accommodates them. That gives you a lot of interesting things to play with because now you have monsters and humans living alongside each other in a state, like in a nation state with laws, with constitution, with separation of powers, with punishments, with all of these complexities, and how a modern nation state deals with monsters is a very, very interesting thread to pull on. Like it's got fascinating world building implications, right? So building an open world is really, like, really fun. But closed, yes, closed means exactly there's a masquerade or a shield or a something that keeps the magic secret from the real world, right? From the human world. And the benefit of that is that gives you a natural tension of what happens when magic leaks, and how do people keep it secret, and what happens if somebody finds out, what happens if it's somebody close to the protagonist who finds out, and there's like all kinds of rules around what has to happen now and the kind of damage it will do and so on, right? So it that also creates a different kind of tension, and the question you really have to ask yourself is just which kind of tension serves your story better. So I went for a closed world because it served my story better to have my protagonist try and keep all these things secret. And she, in fact, is one of the people who try and enforce that secrecy. She's a sentinel, which is what they're called in this world, and they basically police pact breaches and those kinds of issues. So she's part of like the magic establishment that tries to keep this thing a secret, which creates a lot of natural tension for her, especially with the opening of the book where there's a murder that's been committed and there's flowers growing out of a dude's chest and the dude is lying right at her feet, right? So like the police are there's cop cars, there's detectives taking pictures, and there's this dude with like a flower bush blooming out of his chest, and that creates an immediate natural tension for her. I do like open worlds though, not gonna lie. So I have a a a strong idea for the rest of the series. It's not fully plotted, but it is a strong idea. And my current thinking is that there might be shenanigans with the pact. But that is not set in stone, and you cannot hold me to it. um, Yeah, so you can absolutely go the open approach and make magic hard to learn, and kind of balance off normals versus magic kids and so on. So the difference between an open world and a closed one is in an open world, everybody, including normal mundane humans, know that there is magic, know that there is monsters, right? And in a closed world, the magic, the fantasy part is kept secret. That's how I define it. I'm not sure if that's the industry standard, but that's how I define it. So it's also sometimes called a secret world or a world with a masquerade, as in there is it's all kept secret from the normal humans. That's the difference between an open and a closed world. Yeah. Yeah, secret societies and so on. Um, so that's a big decision that you need to make because it fundamentally affects which way you go with your world. Whether you are building into it how the laws work, how schools work, how universities are affected, how science is affected. Do people study magic in a lab? Do they do is Are there magical items that can be bought? Has magic, I don't know, replaced coal? Does it generate clean energy? So these are all very interesting questions that you can suddenly start playing with if you open the world, right? But if it's a closed world, then you have all of the tension of like keeping it secret. So six of one, half a dozen of another. It depends on what kind of story you want to tell, whether you go open or closed. Um, yeah, Anne Rice's universe is closed. Marvel and DC are open. Anita Blake is open. As I said, True Blood, the vampire show from the 2000s. I think it was early 2000s. That was open. I can still watch that on HBO. It was the first few seasons were amazing. Um, the later ones got weird, as these things do have a tendency of doing, but the first seasons were great. Um, they were that southern vampire bull, uh, sucker. It was a great show. So yeah, so those are kind of different approaches to setting up your world and things to think about when creating your urban fantasy world. Okay, so I think I am ready to go live on this puppy. So, the link, I suppose I should do that. Let me hit go live and then I will copy the link. I have read these details and launching. All right. So, the reason why I am doing this as a Kickstarter is because I'm going to drop the link into the chat right now. So that is the link if you guys want to check it out. So the reason why I am doing a Kickstarter for this is because I want to see how many books I should print. Firstly, because I don't want to print like 1,000 books and sell 200 or whatever. And secondly, because there are different things that I would like to print. So I have really, really pretty art on the books. I'll briefly share that cover again. I'm in love with my cover. And I know one shouldn't be in love with mine. I think it is a gorgeous cover. And I really like that skyline. And so there's a thing that you can do with printing where you can create edge art, right? And edge art looks like this. And so it's literally on the edge of the book. And so what I want to do is I want to take that skyline and have the artist make of it edge art. If we hit like the kind of highest stretch goals, and I'm not like I'm not sure we will, but if we do, then I'd like to do that because it's so good looking, and the Las Vegas skyline is such a pretty skyline. So, and I think it would on a book. So um so there's things like that I would like to do. And then of course, um the whole setup of the book and so on, costs money and all the rest of that. Now I want to get it out there. And the Kickstarter gives you the opportunity to, if you buy the paperback, you get the e-back, you get the ebook free of charge, right? So that's the only time you'll get it kind of in that kind of joint package where you get the two together. Um, and the same with the hardback, obviously. So there is also included in this Kickstarter a pirate anthology. So you can get both of these together. There's a reward tier where you can get the pirate anthology, and the pirate anthology has got a short story from me in it from the world that I built for world building blueprints. Right. So the sample world that Kickstarter backers got access to, I wrote a short story in that world that is in that anthology, as well as as well as the short stories of the writers' room writers, as voted for by them. So, um, yeah, Latina says the contrast of beauty and the ominous presence on the cover. Yes, I really, really think it came out well. So that is actually exactly kind of the kind of opening scene of the book, um, because the opening scene of the book is this murder. So, um, it's those flowers blooming out of a dude's chest, and our main character going like, "Whoops, what's this?" So and here's the other thing about urban fantasy, right? Urban fantasy is what I tried to do with this is I tried to capture that noir voice, because I feel like that voice of urban fantasy is kind of what attracted me to the genre. That kind of like dry, humorous tone in the character. And like that is part and parcel for me of urban fantasy. And the other thing about it is that it needs to be fast paced, right? You want to pump that baby. um, a game of D&D where my cleric will go to a Star Wars setting. Well, he's going to be in an interesting position, because from a certain point of view, Gary, one could say that that Jedi are in fact clerics. That is entirely possible to say. So yeah. So I questions about urban fantasy role playing, questions about Blood and Bloom, about the reward tiers. Hit me, guys. What would you like to talk about in terms of urban fantasy, mystery building, character building, etc.? With the story itself, what I did was I just layered on problems onto the main character, because to increase the pace, you basically like layer on a whole bunch of problems. And I guess the best urban fantasy that I've recently read remains probably Dresden Files, followed by Ben Rivers, and they're both like just keep hitting keep hitting the protagonist. It's one thing after another, and until there's like light at the end of the tunnel, or they force light at the end of the tunnel by making some of the problems face each other. um so yes, urban fantasy does indeed lend itself really well to social allegories. Allegories is one of those words that I consistently mispronounce. So if you've ever heard me say it before, I might have said it something like allegories. So so when I say allegories, what I mean is allegories. Um, so, but it does really lend itself well to social allegories, because it's near to our world, but you can add the fantasy to differentiate, right? To layer in, um, the commentary in a way that doesn't, stomp, in a way that doesn't feel like you're hitting somebody in the face with the, uh, with the, with a kind of theme of the story, because you can kind of obscure some of your theme a little bit, behind the fantasy and the magic and so on. Um, thanks, Zeitgeistist. Um, yeah, um, in a world that isn't Earth, what degree of IRL terms for units, clothes, weapons, ranks is too much, and what is fine with you? So I, hmm, I like using our world's titles if it's a specific culture that I'm trying to evoke, right? So, for example, in Sangwil Chronicles, what I did was I had the real world. I had um, I had the European titles, the European noble titles, because it was a French inspired world, right? So it was inspired by kind of like the Frankish and Germanic culture. And so, I took all of that, and I that's why I used like duke and baron and so on. But on the other continents of my world, the continents where I'm currently writing Shadows, the Sangwil Tales, right? I don't use the European inspired titles because their cultures are not inspired by European cultures. They're inspired by various African cultures with some intermingling of some Asian cultures and a couple of like South American cultures here and there. So that creates a very different title and rank situation than what I did with the Northern Empire, right? The Empire of Lumiere. So uh, that I hope that answers your question. It depends on where I am taking inspiration from and what I want the reader to understand. Because the massive benefit of using a title like Baron, Duke, etc., is that the reader knows what those titles mean, right? So you don't have to explain them to the reader. You just have to like introduce them and then move on, and the reader will kind of get it. The downside of using custom titles, the massive downside, is that you have to introduce this rank system to the reader, and that can create an additional barrier to entry. So the question is whether that payoff is worth it to your story and your world to create that custom rank list. Um, Dump space. Fairy lives don't matter today. No, no, fairy lives do not matter today. Um, Latinos, Gary says he'll be working in a fantasy theme park. So Gary's got a cleric that's going to a Star Wars universe. So he's going to be a faith healer over there, Jedi, I guess, and he's going to work in a theme park. Um, so Latino says, how far back in time can you take the story before it's no longer considered to be urban fantasy? So I would say that if you go about to the Renaissance period, I would say I would say at the Renaissance period, it starts becoming historical fiction. But I mean, this is a your mileage may vary thing. And this is a very important point actually about genre that I just want to make. Um, in a genre is not a straitjacket. Okay. Genre is a marketing tool. what genre does is it helps the reader know what they're going to be reading, and that then helps them just, so it helps readers find their right books. That's the purpose of genre. And so when you have like a urban fantasy reader and they're looking for urban fantasy books, like they look for books that match the urban fantasy tropes and that give them that urban fantasy fix. If you have an epic fantasy reader and they're looking for epic fantasy books, then it needs to match that big second world and like the big stories and all the rest of that. If it's an adventure fantasy, it needs to be fast paced. If it's a historical fantasy, it needs to have like history, So if it's steampunk, it needs to be steampunk, etc. So genre is about helping the reader know what the book is about, more than it's about like a strict rule or a straitjacket guideline. That's kind of the purpose. So Saint St. Nicholas says, so a rip-off of Rome, but they are dwarves, you would have them using words like legions and centurions and legates. Yes, if you're ripping off Rome for your dwarves, I would absolutely have them use Rome's words, because it will help the reader understand what the culture is like, right? And that's what basically those decisions are about. It's about how can you lower the barrier of entry for the reader while still giving your world all of the fantastic elements and all of the deep cultural world building that you want to share with them. So you want to kind of like reduce that barrier to entry, but at the same time you want to give the reader what they need. um There are books where the fairies are the bad guys. That does absolutely happen. Um, yeah, absolutely Latino. You can use the Industrial Revolution as your line for like, if the Industrial Revolution's happened, it's an urban fantasy. Um, if I'm guessing you mean the kind of the the combustion engine Industrial Revolution. And if you go older than that, it's a historical fantasy. As I say, like it's a your mileage may vary, and it's about setting the expectation with a reader. Yeah. Um, other than referring to real life sites or people, like saying someone has an American accent or German like car, what's too far for using IRL terminology in non-Earth to you? So to me, I draw the line at like something that is clearly named after a place or a person, right? So I'll give you an example actually from Sangwil. Um, in the Kisangi continent, I have a plant that is based on the Welwitschia plant that we have here in our world. And I am not shy of using, like, an apple tree is an apple tree. Like, I'm not going to rename it. So I was going to just use the Welwitschia name. But the thing is, Welwitschia sounded like such a specific thing that I was like, let me just like check who it was named after. And it was named after like some 18th century German guy, who documented the plant. And that to me was like it was like a that niggles on me. It niggles on me when it's like named after someone fairly recently, like within the last 200 years or 300 years or so. And I'm like, it feels too much like this person would have had to exist in this world for this name to have existed. Now, as it happens, that plant has got some amazing names. Like it's one name translates into two leaves cannot die, because it lives almost, it lives incredibly long. It lives thousands of years. So I just used one of those names, rather than using Welwitschia, because, like I said, like that was actually just directly a German dude's surname. So that for me was the line. um, but I mean, it's every world builder's prerogative to decide where their lines are. There are people who might be 100% fine on using Welwitschia, you know. Um, I would also be very, very hesitant to use Christmas or any kind of religious holiday, as somebody just said in chat, because that would mean that that um, that that holiday, that religious holiday, is somehow in my world. And that would then mean that that religion is in my world, and that then adds a complication. Unless that religion is in my world, in which case 100%. But yeah. So that's kind of like it's a very individualistic thing. My line is normally like, I know that it's named after a place or a person, and it's within the last, like, 200, 300 years. Once you get past that, once it's like an ancient name that was, might have been 1,000 years ago, was named after some dude, I'm like, well, that's fine, you know. Um, so, um yeah, Narnia is a portal fantasy, so, it's different rules apply. Plus, like you say, there's Aslan. Um, yeah, the days of the week are fine. I generally do rename days of the week when I use them, which is not always. But the reason why I rename them is because I look at days of the week as world building opportunities, right? That they are an opportunity to create a a fresh approach, um, or to create a name that fits your culture, right? So it's an opportunity to go look into your world and dig out, like, what gods would have been used for names, what activities that people perform, and all of those kinds of things. So I look at the names of months and the names of days of the week as like a cultural world building opportunity for myself. I am not even remotely saying everybody should do that. I don't think, like, most of the time, it's actually not worth the effort because you don't actually use the weekdays and the months that much, so it doesn't really stick in the reader's head. But um, it does also present an opportunity for cultural world building. So, am I making a mistake by using our month and day? No, absolutely not. No, Latino, you can, like, there is no wrong answers here. Yeah. So, you can build anything you like into your world. But um, as I say, I approach it as like I like to rename the months and the days, because I'm like, okay, well, I want to bring out a culture. All right. I want to have the cultural gods and important events and heroes and so on embedded in these names. But don't let it freak you out. Like, you can absolutely just use Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like our standard days. Yeah. Like, nobody's going to shoot you for it. So I would not stress about that. Uh, yeah, and indeed, for shorter books especially, like, or books, if you're only gonna write a once-off book in the world, etcetera, you don't want to waste time teaching the reader the stuff and training them on how it all works and how it fits together, and then, like, and then they, like, reach the end of the book and they've learned all this about the weeks, and, like, it's had almost no impact on the plot. So it's a very much your mileage may vary. And I wouldn't get hung up on weekdays and week names. I would rename it if you've got, like, cultural highlights you want to work with. So, Um, yeah, Tolkien does wink at the reader a fair bit. Um, so let me share that link again. I am spamming the link because obviously, like, the ideal is to fulfill the Kickstarter within the first. Oh, we've done it. We've done it. I think. I think we are, because I think I set it quite low. Because oh, that's another thing that I wanted to talk about. Um, in case you guys are, wondering why, for example, world building blueprints was more expensive, the book was more expensive, and um, why the Kickstarter had a much higher limit. The difference is fiction versus nonfiction. Yeah. Like, I wrote this. Sure, I did research. Okay. So I did a whole bunch of research into the Valley of Fire. I did a whole bunch of research into the petroglyphs that exist there, the Paiute people, because, that kind of the petroglyphs are very important to my story. And the Paiute people will play a role in future books. There is a Paiute in the stories, but he doesn't play a big role in this one. He's actually Lily's boss. So he's in the book, but it's more a future role. Now, the reason why there's this big, like, so I could write this with minimal research, right? And I could just write it. I could edit it. It doesn't have art. It doesn't have it's just a normal layout, right? So I can do the layout in a single day, and all the rest of that. On the other hand, world building blueprints took months of research, right? Right. Writing a nonfiction book is surprisingly hard, because it is so much research. Like, nobody cares if I make some kind of historical mistake in urban fantasy, right? Unless unless I insult the culture or whatever, like I do something really nasty and or make some nasty comments or whatever, which I wouldn't do because you know I- that is not the way that I approach. Um, but nobody's gonna, like, completely freak out, right? If I make an error somewhere. But in a nonfiction book, if you make an error, that's a disaster. So everything has to be triple checked. You gotta make sure that you've read and you've checked your references and you're, like, doing the right models and and all the rest of that. So there's a lot more effort into it and a lot of art. I mean, you guys have seen world building blueprints, like, there's art and layout and so on. Like that color layout. I do my own layouts, by the way, in a piece of software called Affinity, which is free. Do not pay Adobe for Adobe InDesign. It is a very expensive piece of software that you do not need. Affinity will handle your layout, and it is free. Free, mahala. um, so I do my own layouts, and world building blueprints took me a week to do the layouts. I did the layout for Blood and Bloom for the advanced copy that went out to the advanced copy people and so on. I did that in a day. Like, it literally did it in a single day. So, yeah. How do sales compare for fiction versus nonfiction? So, so because my okay, so my platform is a world building platform, right? So I sell more of world building blueprints than I do of my fiction books on my website to you guys, right? Because you might or might not like my writing, but you're here, so you like my world building thoughts, and so world building blueprints does have a higher sales figure. Not overall, though, because I sell a chunk of the fiction books through Amazon. Um, you know, and that's just random people who don't actually know me. So it's a depends a little bit on your platform and so on. Like, and this is the thing, like nonfiction. If I did not have this channel, the world building book wouldn't sell. It wouldn't sell at all because nobody would trust my opinion on world building, right? The reason why it sells is because I've been doing this for 4 years um and I've been, and so on. But from a like just a writer's perspective, fiction is way easier to sell because nonfiction needs a platform of some kind in order to, like, you know, to have a point of authority. Like, why would people trust you with a piece of nonfiction? You know, so either you have credentials, like academic credentials, or you run a channel like this, or a blog, or some kind of like a platform that you're standing on. Uh, and that's kind of the approach. So I hope that answered your question, Karamalemidov. Ka Kramalimidov? That's an interesting username. That is an interesting username. So, are there any downsides to meritocratic magic systems? Yes. Depends on how you define merit. Yeah. Let's say that merit is defined by how well you stab people. Then you're gonna have a lot of stabbing people. Like, let's say merit is defined by how well you do in an exam. What if it's possible to cheat in the exam? Um, let's say you have a high merit system, but there are other ways to do magic. But the merit system is limited to doing it in this one way. Then all of the other ways of doing magic atrophy because of the merit system, right? Because everybody wants to do it in the merit way. And so you've got a whole school of magic atrophying. So let's think about it this way, right? Let's say that the way of doing magic is kind of equivalent to doing science, right? But you could also make magic by painting, all right? But because it's hard to teach painting, no one does it that way. And it it's easy to teach people to like do it like a maths equation, all right? And so the art side of magic completely atrophies, you know. Um, but it all depends on how you set up your merit and your magic. And of course, that can all create tension in your world, right? Like these things, we can say they're downsides, but I can also call them tension generating devices. So don't be afraid of including things like that in your world. Like if you include them on purpose, they can generate enormous points of conflict that you can use in your story. Um, so yeah, the yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, like I said, it just depends on what you call merit, you know? You can define merit in all kinds of different ways that can create all kinds of different tensions within a world. Um, so yeah. Um, and yeah, and yeah, I mean, so if we think of like one of my favorite sort of meritocratic systems, the Chinese bureaucratic exams, right? That was, oh, I can't remember the imperial house that started it, but I know it was very strong under the Song dynasty. Um, like in theory, anybody could take these exams and become a bureaucrat and gain all of the benefits of that, right? But that was a theoretical fact because in order to do well in these exams, you needed to have time and money to study. And it wasn't the rice farmer's son, working in the paddy who had time and money to study. It was the noble's kid, you know? Um, so yes, thank you, Tiffany. Please hit the like button. Um, so yeah, you can have, and that's like, but that's all. It's like everything in world building, right? You can be Mercedes Lackey, or you can be George R. R. Martin, or you can be anything in between, right? Or Joe Abercrombie, or anything in between, right? And you can set it up as an idealistic meritocratic system, a system that actually is meritocratic, that does give everybody like equal opportunity, right? Um, and that would be a meritocratic system then, and then you find other places to bring in tension. Or you can go like Abercrombie and Martin and be like, sure, it's a meritocratic system, you know, or anywhere on that scale. Yes, subscribe to the channel, do all of those things. um, yeah, okay, so what you're asking, Latino, is whether there is a downside to having um, your your system be learnable, not tied up in genetics or anything else. Like anybody can learn magic. So the only downside to that is um, how powerful is your magic system, and why hasn't everybody learned it? Now that doesn't have to be a downside. Okay, it can entirely be that everybody in your world knows some basic spells. They all can cast a light spell. They all can cast a little fire spell, but not everybody puts in the time and effort to learn to cast a big fire spell because it costs too much, because it's too hard, because of this or that or the other thing, right? So you just need to build in limitations, other like into why magic doesn't just completely run rampant over the world. So just build in some limitations into your magic system. But it's you can make system work. You can make a magic system work that is soft as a runny egg. You can make a magic system work that is hard enough to play a video game with. These things are just what will serve your plot best. Where to find the tension and the drama in your world to bring into your plot. And that's just the question that you ask. Um, yeah, like being like Dan Abnett. I mean, you could be like Dan Abnett too. um, yeah, so you can have a grindable magic system, and then people don't learn it fast, or you can just balance the magic system. Like maybe anybody can learn the spells, but it's really hard to get the components for the spells, right? Because they have to be harvested in a special way, and they've got to be gathered, they have to be preserved, it's preparation. It's a lot of effort to make a spell. Like it's not just easy peasy Japanesey. Actually, I think the polite one these days is easy peasy lemon squeezy. I'm sorry, I'm old. I learned some of these sayings when I was young, um, on channels that were weird. So, you know, um, so it just depends, like how you want to balance that world out. So if it's difficult to get the knowledge to learn, you can cost on that. But I like the idea of everybody being able to cast some kind of spell. Like that's fun. You know what I mean? Like imagine people just learn like little spells, like just little spells that make their everyday life easier. Like they flick on a candle, or they clean the clothes easier, or they dry clothes, just daily, like, and these are just like common everyday spells, and you buy the components for it, and you make your house live for it. Um, yeah, like that sounds like a great world to me. Like lots of fun for a cozy type of fantasy, I think. And um, I am also quite a fan of like just embedding your magic into the world one way or another, um, and being a little whimsical, having fantasy be big and, fantastical. Um, so I would be careful in letting spells form spell components because, and I'll tell you why. Um, the the spell components can be an amazing source of tension. I think I made this point in my grove video, um, when I spoke about sacred groves. You could have a sacred grove that is the only place where a spell component grows, right? And so you have to harvest it at a specific time. And so there's this queuing system around it, and there's people who govern it, and there's control of it. And suddenly this thing becomes an enormous political hot potato, sorry, in your world, like, and it can create a real source of tension. So I would be careful of making it too easy to grab spell components. Like, I would genuinely be really wary of that. But yeah. um yeah. uh Bye, Saint Sir Nicholas. Thanks for coming to the stream. um yeah, you grill burger with your fire spell. Um, so it's just it's a nice, like, it's a cool thought, right? To have, like, everybody having a little bit of magic, not a lot of magic. Like, a lot of magic, you've got to invest time in, and you can't always get the components. You might have the knowledge, but the knowledge isn't enough, and all the rest of that. Um, Latino, I think he probably got it from the time period, because I vaguely remember it from the 80s, when I was a child. So, I was born in 1979, for those of you keep track of these things. So I was a toddler and a, child in the 80s, teenager in the 90s. Um So, thank you. I appreciate that. Um, I credit my mother's genes. Um, she, All right, guys. It has been, as always, an absolute pleasure. Last time, I'm gonna just drop that link in here in case you haven't checked it out. Thank you to the people who have backed it, and, yeah. Um, as always, it is a pleasure to have hung out with all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being my audience. I both appreciate this community, and I really genuinely like it. I like interacting with you guys in the comments, which is why I try to reply to the comments, especially on the newer videos and so on. I think that this is a great community, and thank you for being here and being part of it. I much appreciate you. And yeah, I will see you next week. So Tuesday we get another Royal Courts video. Next weekend, there will be a compilation dropping. My plan at the moment is for it to be a Build a Religion compilation. So I hope, like, that's what you're looking forward to, because it was the next one on the voting list. So thanks, guys, and I will see you next time we do this live.